Hello, beautiful. And what I want to know is what is really good in your life today? I'm Kia, and this is another episode of the Female Veterans Podcast. Today, I have with me Lani, and she is incredible. She absolutely is. She is another podcast host. And as you know, when Carrie came on from Freedom Sisters, I love having podcast hosts on with me today, especially podcasters that talk about military, because the more we're talking and the more we're joining forces and lifting our voices up to share these stories, the more we will be heard and we can affect positive change. So I'm excited to have her here with me. She was in the Army. She has quite a big story. She's an author and an influencer, and she's really, really sweet. And I'm excited to hear everything about her and share it with you. So, welcome to the show, Lani.
Thank you for having me. I've been wanting to come on here for, I think years at this point.
Aw, it's so sweet. You flatter me. You flatter me. Oh, I love your show. I love everything you do. And I'm
Oh,
so
thank you.
excited to talk about your book and talk about everything and share that with everybody, because you know what? You never know when your story is going to be someone else's survival guide. And that's what we're out here do. We're like trying to save some lives when we can, right? This is the
Yeah,
important part of the mission that we both do.
absolutely.
So tell me, why did you join the military? What made you join?
I wouldn't say it's a small town in California, but it's not very wealthy. It's probably on the poorest end of Santa Barbara County. And a lot of people get stuck there. And I started thinking I was going to be one of those people. I had a lot of friends that knew exactly what they wanted to do with their life, what they wanted to go to school for, what they wanted to do for work. And I was just kind of floating. I didn't really know where I belonged. And my dad had been in the Army, he was a Vietnam veteran, and both of my grandfathers had served, but I never considered us a military family. So, military was kind of just not a thought. I grew up next to an Air Force base, still wasn't much of a thought. And then just hit a point where when I graduated from college, I had my associates, and it's like, where do I go from here? So I had a friend that joined and he came back from boot and was kind of like, it's the greatest job ever. It's the best 9 to 5 you could ever ask for. And just really talked it up. And I was just like, you know what? Why not? And so ended up in an Army recruiting office. And within 6 months, I was out the door and flying to Fort Jackson. So it just kind of came up, but it wasn't really ever a thought like growing up, like, oh, that's what
Mhm.
I'm going to do. It just kind of ended up that way.
And that's interesting, because for me, it was never a thought either. It was just not on my radar of anything that I would ever do, being that I have a personality type that would be classified more like a hippie. Like, you just love everybody and be happy go
Yeah.
lucky. And somehow I managed to retain that even during the military, I'm told by some of my friends. But I mean, it definitely, certainly shaped me and changed me. But I've said on here a million times, I went in because my mom wanted me to, essentially. And I wanted to get money for college. Yeah.
Yeah. That was a big thing. My mom was kind of like, maybe you should look at the Air Force. And I did. That's who I took my ASVAB through. And they kind of just, I wasn't really sold on the idea by them. And so I kind of just went back and finished school. I was working on an art degree. So the military for me was just like, everyone's like, you're an art kid. Like, what are you, what are you going to do? I was quiet. I was a surfer. So again, it was like, when I showed up at boot, it's like, you're the stereotypical beach Cali girl and stuff like that. And it
Yeah.
was just like I was calling everybody dude. And so I was getting in trouble because I just couldn't say drill sergeant. And but I was really shy and I was pretty reserved and had learned to do a lot on my own in life. And so joining a team was just like the idea of doing that's just like, I don't know, I'm kind of a loner. So now
Oh,
it's like the
yeah.
one team, one fight. Like, I don't know if that's me, but I ended up there all because I was told it was an awesome 9 to 5. So,
Well, it was actually. That's actually pretty true. So we were talking about what you were saying and getting in trouble for saying "dude" in boot camp. What was boot camp like for you in total?
I expected it to be much harder because of my dad having gone through during Vietnam. I had some horror stories from him, and
Oh,
I thought, okay, so it's definitely going to shape me. And I kind of wanted to break out of my shell. So I thought maybe I need someone to yell at me. Like maybe that's going to help me in life somehow. It's gonna suck when I'm going through it, but I feel like it's like the end game. Like I'm gonna be just more like less reserved and more outgoing. Like I thought I was gonna be just a better person for it, and I went in and it wasn't really, but I was surprised how well people bonded and how fast they did it. And it
Mhm.
was co-ed, so it was both guys and gals doing it. And it was just showing up and you're all kind of embracing this up together. So uh it was a lot of like sleep deprivation. And the biggest thing for me was I'm a big foodie. I love to snack. And the idea of you're not going to get to do that. You're going to eat when we say you can. And while you're eating, we might take your meal away.
Yeah.
There's no midnight snack. It was just like, oh my God. So it's like the discipline aspect for me, just for that was like, oh, okay, that's not going to be very fun. But a lot of people say they don't like red phase because that's where you're learning to be a team. So you're going through a lot of like obstacle courses. It's very physical. And I loved it because I found out I was very competitive, even though I knew I was quiet. I didn't think I was as competitive as I found out that I was when I got there. But I thought it was a lot of fun. It was scary at times, and I definitely did get screamed at in my face. And but I don't know if it changed me, though. I don't feel like I came out any different. I wasn't any less reserved or anything. So it backfired in that sense. I came out still feeling very much like myself, which I was kind of disappointed because it was like I'm still really quiet in the art student. And so it was like, okay, maybe it could have been harder, but it was enjoyable. It was definitely something I had a lot of fun doing after I got past the idea of like, wow, I can't believe I chose to do this while they were making us do some like running with your duffel bag over your head and just standing there for hours. Like, oh, I picked this. Like, it's interesting.
I feel that. I felt that way pretty much the first entire half of boot camp. Every night I would dream that I was at home and I would wake up in the morning at Reveille and be like, right, I chose this. I did this. So I've got to do it. Like I've got to pull through. And can remember I'd see these big, strong guys like sobbing and like breaking down. And I'd be looking at them because we were co ed too. In fact, I'm Navy. So we were one of the first sort of co-ed integrated companies that was going through. We were a 900 company. And so we had, instead of it being a brother and sister company, we were all the same company. And, their barracks was just the floor below us. And, we did everything together. Right.
Yeah.
So it was interesting, an interesting dynamic to see that. And I definitely can vibe with what you were saying. I didn't change much. I expected to be completely transformed by boot camp. And I thought that I was going to become like, I don't know, militant. I thought,
I thought I was going to be G.I. Jane or
right,
something.
right.
I was far from it.
No,
That's
I,
awesome.
I was not G.I. Jane when I came out. I was like, in fact, it actually was bad actually in retrospect because I didn't take to the training like a lot of other people did. It made me stick out, and you don't really want to stick out. Right, like you don't want to be the one that sticks out.
Yeah.
So I still don't know how I made it through my entire enlistment and got an honorable discharge, but thankfully I did. But there were some a few close calls in there because I just wasn't the right personality for serving,
Yeah.
unfortunately. It just wasn't that person, but I did it. And I'm super proud of it, but it was tough. So,
Yeah.
did you make a lot of really good friends in boot camp? Did you make connections there?
I made a few that I still talk to today. Like I went to boot camp 10, almost 11 years ago. And
Mhm.
so I've kept a few people, but it was really, there was a girl I met at the MEP station before we flew out for boot. And she ended up being the person I stuck with all through the whole process, flying there, hanging out at the USO. getting to the reception portion, going into getting your company. We went through the whole thing together, and then we got split when we had to go to AIT, which was devastating because she was literally my battle buddy. We went through everything together.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple people I've talked to kind of here and there on Facebook, or have found me through my podcast, but really she was the one that we left sisters, and we're both California girls. And so it's like we've just always, even like on graduation day, her family couldn't come out. They couldn't afford to come out. And my parents ended up getting her a pass to come with us. And so she was calling my parents mom and dad because they just treated her to like her freedom day to get off post and go do whatever she wanted to do. And so they kind of adopted her in and stuff like that. So she and I have been just unfortunately separated by distance because we never got to serve together. Almost went to Germany together, and then my orders got canceled. So we came really close. We always come really close to ending up at the same spot, and we just miss each other. And so, but yeah, we've definitely kept track of where the other one is. So that was probably my favorite part of the military, is just the people you get to meet. But I didn't have a ton of friends from the military because I was still quiet. And a lot of people took that as, oh, she's rude or she's stuck up. And I was just shy. And so it deterred a lot of people because I just had the poker face going on. And so it was
They
lonely in some aspects, I guess, because of that.
they call it a resting bitch face, right?
Yeah,
And they
I
just
definitely had it.
presume that because you're not big and bubbly and smiling and talking to everyone, that actually my best friend from the military, she lives out here with me and by Portland. And that was what she went through, actually. So I really understand what you experienced, because she used to lament that to me all the time. And I'd always be like comforting her that people were presuming that she was away, that she really, really wasn't. She's actually hilarious once you get to know her.
I had a
So,
lot of people come up and they're like, I thought you would be so mean.
mhm,
I'm just like,
yeah.
why? Like, and they're just like, oh, you're so nice. And it's like, yeah, I mean, if you give me the opportunity to speak, like nobody would come up to me because I had just the look that I didn't want to be bothered, but I really, I was just hanging out. So
I mean,
it worked against me.
it's not like, I don't even know why they do that. It's not like you're mean mugging people, like you're giving people ugly. Like you're just not with a big smile on your face, and then people
Yeah.
presume you're mad.
But it was like there was kind of that stereotype when I went into the army, because I went into a cavalry unit. And so there was this idea that that's how all the women were going to be. And
Oh,
so, and I came in very aware of the stereotype. And so I really tried to keep myself kind of like not like really tuned it down to not be bubbly or like the beach girl and this and that, because I didn't want them to think I wasn't taking it seriously. And
right.
so I know there were times I probably was mean mugging people, not even meaning to, but but I was really looking out for myself because I had so many men around me. So it was this idea of like I have to like no feminine qualities, no, not like I have to let it go. The femininity, like it's going to be a problem. Don't come off too nice because
Mm,
they're going to think I'm weak. They're going to think I'm dumb. Like there are so many things that the guys already had, like these preconceived ideas of having women coming into the cavalry. So I just kept to myself. It's like, don't talk until you're spoken to, and then you won't give yourself away. Because I didn't want anyone knowing I was reserved and quiet in the art student. that wasn't
right.
gonna that wasn't gonna work out for me. So
I met a lot of people in the Navy that had sort of changed their identity when they went in. For me, that didn't actually I was the opposite. Like I somehow became more of a free spirit while I was serving, and which was kind of a problem. But a lot of people I met were like that. They were like, they were forgetting who they were before the military, and they were just going to focus on recreating or reinventing a new persona for themselves to change their life completely. And that had never occurred to me, and I met a lot of people that were also escaping, traumatic lives
yeah.
coming into the military too. And it was the same thing where they just went in a completely different direction like even personality wise, from who they were before they went in. Have you met people? Did you come across people who were doing things like that in the military?
I met people that were coming from all different places, third world countries, like people that really were escaping something to better their lives. And I think they really held on to that idea of the soldier was their identity because they wanted to leave everything else that they grew up being back there and whatever they ran away from. And I definitely dealt with it too because I got to the point where I kind of got wrapped up in the traumatic experiences as well as kind of the bonds you build while you're on a deployment or in a combat zone to where I really identified at some point as a soldier. And so when I got out, it was like, who am I outside of a uniform? Because I really latched on to everything that a soldier was, at least in my mind. It was somebody with honor and purpose. And you had some level of respect in society because you were doing something. And when I got out, it was just like, okay, like, what am I now? Like, I don't have any worth. I don't have any sense of duty anymore. I don't really know what I'm doing or what I'm going for. And I met a lot of people along the way that kind of felt the same way, that they got so wrapped up in who they were in the service that they didn't know who to be when they went away. It was like the institutionalization part of it. And, but a lot of people did seem to kind of over time, maybe not immediately, but over time, let go of who they were in boot or prior to, because I came out of boot feeling like myself and definitely didn't leave the army feeling like that same person that had gone into it.
For sure. So, what was AIT like for you?
AIT was, I didn't like AIT because leaving boot was very structured.
Mhm.
And AIT, it's almost like too much freedom comes in. And so you start having a lot more quarrels and problems with each other. And when I was in boot, we were probably 60 or 70 personnel for our platoon, and there was only 12 females. And then when I went to AIT, we were 25 for our platoon, and it was 22, I think, females.
Mm.
There was a lot of fighting and like just it was crazy. It was a big jump from going from boot where it's very structured and you had to help each other with everything and you really relied on each other to AIT where people are sneaking out to get drunk and
Mm.
and just going off post to do whatever they're doing and just so many fights. And like our platoon leader had to come in many times to just do kind of like the intervention Saturday where it was like, just hash it out already. Like you guys need to yell at each other, yell at each other. And we'd sit there all day and people would just be just over petty things. And so for me, it really got away from what I thought the army was going to be like. And so I just really disliked it because it just seemed like nobody had any discipline. Like everything you learned in boot just kind of went out the window and it was kind of every man for themselves. And the individuality started coming back and you could see the issues with it because the team building just wasn't there. People were throwing each other under the bus, leaving each other behind. And so it just felt almost like an extension of high school. And so I wasn't really pleased with being at AIT.
Oh man, that sounds horrible.
It was a long 9 weeks.
Oh, it sounds really horrible. A school for me was awesome. Like it was really great. But there was some of that dynamic where you had more freedom. So you had to quickly learn how to navigate that freedom. Because for me, coming from private school, going to boot camp, there was structure to structure. And then suddenly I had more freedom than I'd ever had in my entire life, really. So it was definitely an adjustment, but we did have a quite a bit. When I think it's probably because my A school was on the other side of the base from boot camp. So that entire base was really strict in Great Lakes. So I think that probably had something to do with we didn't have a lot of the same freedoms that other bases had, and we were aware of it, right? That's why a lot of people didn't want to go to Great Lakes to get stationed there. So that's kind of how it was for me. A school was fun, but it was like an adjustment to the freedom, and there was drama that happened too. Like I had drama with another girl, and I'm not one for drama, and I wouldn't say it was like high school, but when I became staff at Great Lakes, when I finished A school and actually got my job, got my orders there, I then began to see that it was kind of like high school being stationed
Yeah.
there as staff. The base is a small place. There's gossip, there's dramas unfolding, there's a lot of storylines playing out on that base, right? So I can feel your pain, what that must have been like for you. Where did you go after AIT?
I ended up at Fort Riley in Kansas, and which is where I live right now. I've come full circle. and and it was the only active duty base I ever went to. And I from there I deployed to Afghanistan within in less than a year of getting to Fort Riley. I was already in Afghanistan. And then when I came back, I had about 2 years left, and then I went reserve and ended up down in Fort Myers, Florida. So Fort Riley is one of the most hated posts by Army personnel. We call it the black hole because if you come here once, you're probably going to come here again, and you might not ever get out of it. And so it's definitely not on the top of anybody's list. And I think the reason why I got here is because, at least for the Army, when I went in, they did wish lists, and you could choose 3 when you're at boot. And everybody's always like, you're not going to get your first. They're going to make sure to not give you your first pick just to screw with you. So I put Fort Riley first, trying to think I was being smart. Like, I'm going to put the worst one first because then I won't get it. And of course, nobody puts Fort Riley, so I got it. And so it didn't work out, but I ended up learning to love it. Kansas it's very different from California. And so I definitely miss the beach. The prairie is not really my thing, but I dealt with it. You learn to love it, especially because of the people you're with. So
I had
made it work.
a similar experience to that actually. Choosing, so I chose Great Lakes. Like I said, most people didn't want to go there because it was a very strict base. And in A school, my 2 best friends, Kim and Susanna, we had this plan to go to the same base. So we were trying to figure out how we could stay together because we'd been super tight. Kim and I from boot camp, and then Susanna, we met at A school. And so we've been like the 3 musketeers, right? And so we had this grand scheme of staying together. And we're like, okay, well, let's pick the base no one wants to go to. And we hear that we are here in Chicago. We like Chicago. It's okay, right? It's not that bad. So let's pick here, and we're more likely to get to stay together. Well, 2 of us got stationed there, and Kim ended up going to Camp Pendleton. So we ended up maybe she didn't pick. Who knows? Maybe she was like, no. But who knows? She ended up getting stationed elsewhere, and then Susanna and I stayed together. But that's kind of how. And I got sucked in, so I never moved. I got sucked into Great Lakes because no one wanted to go there, and they needed a body. So
Yeah.
I was there my entire time in.
Yeah. For me, when I was leaving AIT, like when you're a couple weeks out from graduation, they give you your orders, especially those that are going overseas get theirs first. And so I had an assignment that was going to take me to Germany. I don't remember which post. And so I went and had to do all the briefings, the overseas stuff, had to get all the shots done. And as soon as I got done, they're like, oops.
Oh,
it's actually Fort Riley.
oh.
But you're going to be immune to all kinds of stuff.
Yay.
And so I cried because, like I said, my friend from Basic, I knew she was going to Germany too. And so it's just like, we just told each other, like, we're going to see each other, and we're all excited. And then I had to send her the text. That's just like, I'm not leaving. I'm going to the Midwest.
Like, yay, from Germany to the Midwest. I'm so lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's how it happens sometimes, right? Like, you get those orders, you don't have a choice. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. You do what you got to do.
Just roll with it.
Yep. Suck it up, right? So tell me, what was your active duty experience like as being in the cavalry?
I think I told you it was good and bad days. There were days where I absolutely loved it. I really liked a lot of the people I served with. Made me really proud to be a soldier and what I was doing. And then the next day, it was just like, how long do I have left on my contract? Like, And a lot of it is because units are always changing. You have new commands coming in. So the first command I had, I really enjoyed. There was a lot of morale and just everybody got along. And when we deployed together, you get even closer. And then when we came back that year, we were back for it was just this big shift. We got a new command team that completely just was like, we're going to take it back to the 1940s. We want to really bring the history back for the Cav. And like they had us doing 1940s PT tests for like spur rides and stuff like that. And it was awful. And it killed a lot of the morale because they got rid of everything that everybody bonded over. And a lot of new NCOs came in that were just like, we're going to be by the book. If it's not in the book, like, screw you, figure it out, whatever, throw you to the back burner. And it got real kind of dog eat dog for a while to where it was a lot of clicks and everything that I knew the military is being that one team type deal. It didn't exist. And for me, the love and hate came from within my first month of being at Fort Riley. I experienced MST from someone outside of my unit because I was in processing barracks. So I was separated from the company I was going to. And it was an all male barracks. It was a bunch of like infantry guys and stuff. And so from the get go, I dealt with the idea of everything I learned in basic of how close we are and how we have to work together. Not everybody's on that same page. And you start to learn like, okay, just because we all look the same, we're wearing the same uniform and same mission, stuff like that, we're not on the same team. And so I had a lot to work through. And we didn't have a lot of women in the Cav unit, but there were enough. And we did not help each other in any shape or form. A lot of rumors, a lot of, if you're not in our clique, we're going to make sure we throw you to the dogs to keep the eyes off us. And because I was a loner coming in, that was how I knew how to kind of survive, was just to depend on myself. And so they took that as, you're not on our side then. And so a lot of the women were passing out my room number and trying to get people to come to my door and were harassing me and had enough to the point where I jumped into an early marriage just to get away from the post, just to kind of separate myself. And it kind of just put me on this snowball effect of just things one after the other, because I was trying to run away from the people I was working with. But then I also had people I really liked. So it was like this big contradictory lifestyle of, I love it, but I hate it. I like them, I don't like them. And it's all day, every day, in the States, overseas. And so it was just like really hard to figure out if I wanted to be there. Do I want to stay? Do I want to go? What's on the outside for me? Is it any better on the outside? So my whole experience was just really a love-hate experience, is the easiest way to put it, because I don't regret serving, but there were days I was just ready to go and just didn't really know what else to be besides a soldier. So I endured a lot, but it comes at a price.
So I feel that, and it never gets any easier to hear. I'm so sorry that you had to experience that. It can be a hateful place. And there are so many people. I mean, before I go back and talk about the MST, because it's really an important part of your story,
Mhm.
there's something else around it that you mentioned that I want to take a minute to talk about, because I hear about this on the show as well. And that is the other people who are complicit in the bullying and the harassment. And a lot of it is women. And we got to do better for each other, right? We
Yeah.
can't assimilate into a male dominated culture and take that mentality, right? Because we are women, and it's unfortunate that we can be, instead of straightening each other's crowns, right? We can be the worst towards each other, like even more than the guys. And then
Yeah.
it's almost re-victimizing someone who has just survived something so traumatic. It's just something that I think that we need to keep talking about and keep putting out there. And it could just be rumors. It could be just a clique that spread rumors about you, or it could be a group that wrote you're naming your email on the wall of the bathroom while you're deployed. Like there's so many things that happen that are petty and awful, but torment somebody.
Mhm. I
That's
used to
part
always
of it.
tell people the hardest part was it was like, yeah, man physically hurt me, but women brought out psychological warfare. And it was so much easier to heal from the physical side of MST than the repercussions of rumors getting spread and stuff like that, because it's a constant just bring it back to the surface, like not going to let you heal from it and going to make it sound like it's your fault and going to really just break you down emotionally and psychologically. And that was the hardest part of it, was that it's like you're my sisters, like shouldn't you be the first ones to come like have my back? And it
Mhm.
was because I wasn't in their group that I was no concern of them. And so it's just kind of like, just stay over there. Like you're kind of like, you're broken and you're this and you got all this stuff on you and we don't want to be associated with it. And it carries over. And it seemed like from what I got out of it was to try to fit in with this like masculine unit. It was like we have to be them, and to be them we have to hate each other because that's what they're doing. When it wasn't the men that were doing it, there were a lot of men in the cav unit that were very accepting of us being there, but it was this idea of like, to be one of the guys you have to kind of just take it out on the other women and not associate with them and show that you're one of them, so that like they just, you kind of blend in and they don't see your faults or where you're maybe the weak link in something or whatever. It just draws the attention to somebody else. But then it's like, then you're just destroying somebody else's life. And nobody ever seems to take the time to think like, what am I doing in the long term, like to this person? And so that's where I really, that was the hateful side I had towards the military of like, how are we doing this to each other? Like, why are we sexually assaulting each other? Why are we harassing each other? Why are we bullying and all this stuff? Like, are we not here for a common purpose? We all either want a better life or to have better lives once we're done with it. Like, why are we doing this to each other? Like, is this part of like earning that prize? Like, you have to go through this torment. And so it was definitely a disappointing thing to see how some people just weren't about being the brother sisterhood type thing. There was definitely no family stuff for them.
That sucks. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. What do you think was the catalyst for all of the bullying? Did you report the assault?
No, it was because someone had seen him leaving my barracks room, and it was just the telephone game. And it's like the new girl, because I was brand new. So it was really easy to single me out because it's just like the new girl in your unit. I saw her with so and so. And and then it's just kind of like, oh wow, you get around quick, like already making your mark here.
Wow.
And then it was just kind of like, and then because the women didn't really accept me, I had my best friends in the military, at least at Fort Riley, were men, because I felt safer if I could be around them, because they understood that something happened. They didn't know what, because I never talked about it till after my service, but they knew something was up and they knew I was getting harassed by the women. So they actually took me under their wing and would walk me to my barracks room to make sure nobody would harass me. Because I had girls that would gang up on me. There'd be like 10 of them, and they would just running their mouths, stuff like that. So it just got to the point where it was just pure harassment, standing outside my bedroom door and stuff like that. And so the guys took me under their wing. And then the repercussion of that was, oh, well, you must be sleeping with all of them because you're with the guys and perception's everything. And so to try to find protection, it was like I had to deal with the fact that everybody's going to make their rumors. And so it just kept getting worse, because there's the one where that someone was sure they saw somebody come from my room that ignited it. And then the fact that I stayed around the guys was just kind of like, okay, she's easy. And that was the rumor mostly that got around, was, okay, she's an easy soldier. So whatever, like, here's a room number, go bother her. So,
Wow, that's horrible. Now I'm thinking back to my own service, and like I said, the base is a small place, and I was on the same base for 5 years while I was on active. And
mhm.
so I heard lots of rumors. Okay. Lots of rumors, and it makes me wonder like if any of those rumors that I was hearing it was a situation like yours. Now, I'm not the type of person to gang up I'm actually the champion of the underdog typically. So if I was on your base, we probably would have been friends, right? I'm
Yeah.
a safe female for you. That's just how I've always been since grade school. But it makes me wonder about some of those girls. Thinking back to them, it just makes my heart hurt because that's so shitty. That's like some of the worst behavior. How did you survive? How did you keep going every day?
I mean, the biggest thing was doing the young private thing and jumping into a marriage. First guy that seemed safe enough was kind of like, cool, I'm getting off post. I'm going to separate myself, at least living wise, because then at least I'll see them just at work. I wanted to eliminate as much like interaction as I could. And then it was like I had those guy friends that I could tell anything to, especially like when we were deployed. Like we would just sit in the guard tower, you'd have 8-hour shifts, and you just sit there and just let it all out. And uh, that we're kind of each other's therapists. Like it was just venting and just I've always kind of had a dark sense of humor. It just runs in the family. And so I found ways to try to like make the joke out of stuff and find the humor in it or whatever. But really, I just shoved a lot of stuff down and tried to bury it. And it came back and bit me in the ass later on because I had all this unresolved stuff and I walked out of the military. So now I'm trying to figure out my identity, my purpose, all this stuff. And then it's like, okay. And then I went through a divorce because a marriage based off that is not going to last. And
Right.
unfortunately for him, because I came into it wanting to escape something else, it's like you kind of bleed on your relationship because you have all these wounds that you're not fixing. And so he got a lot of stuff taken out on him and he didn't know where it was coming from. And he was military and he was ex-infantry. So he's kind of not a big talker himself. So he's just kind of like, I don't know what the issue is. I'm just going to go sit in a corner. Like, just sorry, whatever I did. And so it got just there was a lot of loneliness in my service because of the fact that I didn't feel like I could talk to a lot of people. I had that small group, but it always remained that really small group. I didn't feel like I ever got to know anybody else because my trust got squashed so early on and never really made friends with females. And it was really hard even coming out of the service to have anything to do with female veterans for like organizations and stuff because it's like you guys are the ones that were in the service doing this. And it's like just because your titles changed, you're still those people.
Mhm.
And so it took a long time to just be able to talk with other women, really. But a lot of it came from just having that dark sense of humor, like laugh it off, move on. And that's what the Army was kind of teaching us to do. And of course, I also did the stuff the Army teaches you to do that isn't good, like drinking and stuff like that. Like you kind of drink your sorrows away. So I chose a lot of unhealthy coping mechanisms also, but that's what the Army accepts. It's kind of like just go home and drink, out of sight, out of mind, whatever, just be at PT. They accepted it better than you should go to behavioral health because
Right.
now you're missing work. That's during duty hours. You drink after duty. So let's stick with the alcohol. Like,
Right. Right.
so I mean, it's just one of those things you just learn to kind of just keep trucking. You're not really even dealing with it to some degree.
You compartmentalize, right? Stick it
Yeah.
away somewhere in the dark abyss and just keep
Hmm.
moving from the next day to the next to get through. I mean, I
Yeah.
can identify with that, especially even when you said, you went into a marriage to stay safe. I did the same thing. I got married way too early, way too young, because I felt like unsafe, right? But it wasn't because of my peers. It was because of the system itself. It was
Yeah.
because of my superiors and the things that, they thought that I was doing or trying to say that I was doing because of who I hung around with, because of my small group of friends that I had were not favored. I was probably more favored than some of the people that I hung around with, but
I
because
could
I
say the same
was,
thing.
right?
I was liked by like my NCOs, my leaders and stuff like that. But the crowd I had, like my peers that I chose to hang out with, were not the liked soldiers
Hmm.
by any means. They were the ones everybody was just waiting for their contract to end.
Yes.
But they
Yep.
were my safety nets. And so I wasn't going to let them go. But when they did finally leave, because they got out before me, then I did meet a lot of other people because a lot of people were kind of deterred just from the fact that I had those friends. Because my friends were kind of like, if you broke it down to like high school, the outcast nerd group. Like it's like it's your Dungeon and Dragon kind of.
Those would have been my friends.
Yeah, so like we were already kind of like we were like the readers. So right there we were already outcasted for the army because it's just like, oh, you read books? Like, yeah, we're not friends.
Oh,
And
that's
so we were definitely just the nerd group. And so we were definitely the outcasts of our platoon, our company, but we got along well. We just because of it, a lot of NCOs were kind of like, why do you hang out with them? Like, come on.
Mhm.
Like,
Aw.
but it was like, hey, if you guys made me feel safer here, I wouldn't have to go hang out with these people. Or
Mhm.
if the women could like let whatever's going on over there go, I would go talk to them. But they couldn't. So I just stuck with my little outcast group.
So for me, it was a little bit different. We were almost like too cool for school. But what happened was being in Chicago, and I served in the 90s, in the mid 90s. So there was a lot of underground house parties, and we would go to them because, well, I was not old enough to get into a club. So we would go to these underground parties, and everything was cool. Everything was fine. And actually, what we were doing down there was we helped a lot of people. Actually, this is in my book. This is part of what my book is about, what we were really doing at these parties, right? And we're trained hospital corpsmen, like medics, and
Mhm.
we would go to these parties and we helped a lot of kids. But what was happening in the military by day, where I was more in like glitter and wigs and lashes and looking like a pixie, like a fairy. By day, I was in uniform doing my job. Okay. The problem only occurred is when people started to find out what we were doing. There was a crew of us that would go to these. And
Mhm.
when they found out what we were doing, it began to have problems, repercussions, because, little things we started to be very avant-garde in a way. Like my best friend, he dyed his hair blonde, and that's what set everything in motion for us. And that and it ended up with a lot of people going to the brig, a lot of people getting kicked out of the military. It was just sort of like it was like a persecution in almost in a way because they didn't like that. So one by one they came for us. And that's a big story that I will tell another day. But what happened ultimately was I was so afraid for my personal safety and my freedom that I ended up, not to say that I didn't love my first husband, but I ended up marrying him in retrospect, looking back, as part of a way to keep myself safe because I needed to change my image so that I became aware of what it looked like. And if I was fitting in, right, and I was doing what they thought was okay, then I would be safe. So I totally
Yeah.
feel it different but similar, right? That need to be safe and to protect yourself. So you get into this marriage, and then of course the marriage doesn't work out because of all of these other things that has to do with it. So were you married when you transitioned out of the military?
We got divorced the month after I got out of active duty, and so I kinda got hit with everything all at one time. So it was
Wow.
leaving my job, ending the marriage, and then because I went reserve, I had to move down to Florida, and so then I left my house behind too. So I went somewhere I didn't know anybody and had to start over by myself and didn't know any veterans out there, and so it was just kinda like, I guess I'm just gonna try to figure this out. And so to buy myself time, I went to school so I could use my GI Bill so I could get basically just the housing allowance. I didn't know why I was going to school. It was just I just needed housing allowance. And so I was down there, and because of I kind of did the same thing where it was like, okay, I'm by myself. I need to figure something out. My reserve unit was horrible. And to kind of just deal with it, I jumped into another relationship. And then it ended up just being horrific and started dealing with the domestic violence and stuff like that. And then I had my daughter. And that's when I realized, like, once I had her, like, okay, I have to let the military go because I can't deploy. I can't go somewhere and leave her behind with this person. And so I had to kind of walk away from it fully because I always felt like if I went reserve, I would keep a foot in. So it's like if I want to go back, like I can kind of gravitate back towards active duty. But because I didn't have the family care plan, I lost out on that active duty idea of going back when I was ready because I kind of thought I'm going to take a mental break and just kind of get away from everybody. Let all the people that just made my service hell figure out where they're going to go and maybe they'll go off to different places. So if I end up back at Fort Riley or something, they won't be there. But really just getting out, it was like I almost repeated what I did active duty wise. I looked for comfort from a man and then just kind of threw my whole life off again. And so it was a mess, but I definitely overloaded myself trying to change everything at one time because I wasn't really sure what the root of my unhappiness was, if it was the army, my marriage, or where I was living. And so I just was like, I'm just going to let it all go and start over.
Wow.
And it was just too much to do at one time. And then I started realizing like I didn't hate the military. I didn't like the people I was around. My marriage wasn't supportive enough to feel like I had just support. He
Yeah.
definitely wanted me to get out because he was like, I can see what it's doing to you. I don't like who you are because of the army. And so then it's like I got out, but then we got divorced. So it was kind of like, well, okay.
Yeah, that's a lot. And that's a huge transition. So that was your transition into the reserves, but what was your transition like coming out of the army completely? Was it still along those lines where you were just having to really figure everything out at once and now you're a mom? So,
Yeah, it was pretty much the same thing. Only the reserve offered me a little bit of purpose because it was still kind of like being able to say I'm still a soldier, kind of like I'm a weekend warrior, like I'm a part-time soldier. And so it gave me enough to feel like I was still a part of it to a degree, but it wasn't at the level that the active duty side was giving me for purpose and all this stuff. And so once I stepped out of it completely and I went to school and I was working on my bachelor's, it was kind of like I was able to put it off again for a little bit because, well, I'm working on a bachelor's. So when people ask me what I'm doing, oh, I'm a full time student. And so it still felt like I was somebody, like I was doing something productive. And then when I got out of school, it was just like, oh, yeah, okay, I don't no school, no job, single mom now. And it was just like, where do I go from here? And it was still the idea of, okay, so if I missed the military, but I didn't really want to be in it, maybe if I moved back to the Fort Riley area, being inside of it will at least be enough for me because I won't be in it, but it's still, I'm around it. And that made the transition horrible because then I had to watch soldiers every day and remember what I gave up. And so it's just kind of a slap in the face day after day of like, oh, yeah, remember this? You used to have that and then you gave it up. And so I really went through like this self-loathing time of just like, if you were this, if you were that, if you hadn't let yourself deal with the MST, if you hadn't let people push you around, if you had, and all this stuff. And I really became my worst enemy because I've just dropped all the fault and all the responsibility on myself when I knew deep down it wasn't all my fault. And I knew there were other things and there was more parts of the equation, but my transition was just another like level of hell it felt like from what I stepped off of dealing with all the trauma from the military.
wow, that is a difficult transition. I think a lot of us, I didn't have an easy transition out. Many of the women I talk to don't have an easy transition out of the military. And so we struggle. I mean, definitely you're not alone with that. I'm sure you know.
I
But
haven't heard anyone say that transition was easy. I've heard more stories of it
mm,
being difficult than people having like that success story of like I got out and everything all my dreams came true, I
mm,
really did start living the dream. Most people go through years of struggling and figuring out what they want to do and who they are all over again.
absolutely. And it doesn't even matter if you had a good or bad experience in, I find, because even people who have had a wonderful experience serving, come out, and then their identity, it comes back to the identity of, I was a soldier, I was a sailor, I was a coastie, I was a Marine, I was Air Force, like I was an airman. Now I am, or I was a captain, I was an officer of this, and now I am out and I am just me.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and who is that now without all of that? And then it's sometimes it's the friends and the family environment. Some people are in, I mean, for me, the pharmacy was kind of like a family. I mean, once, once they got past the stigma, because I had the stigma that went around with me, obviously there were rumors and stuff that went around about me and what I was doing. But once you got to know me, which is why I say the powers that be, the people in charge didn't like me, but they did. It wasn't necessarily me they were after, but I was sort of guilt by association, sort of like what you were talking about. So then once you got to know me, people would then love me. They would want me to be a part of, their unit and be a part of their department. But before I was coming, and when I went to the pharmacy, they didn't want me. And it was made clear that they didn't want me. They loved the girl that I was trading places with, and they were very sad to see her go. And they did not want me because I was kind of trash, And when I got there, I had to suck it up. Like, I had to know that they didn't want me there, that they thought very low of me, and that I had to just show them who I was. And I was determined to do it. It took me 6 months to change their perspective and their perception of who I was and how I would perform my job,
Yeah.
to and it took time, but I was willing to do it. And it became like a family to me. So even though I was one of those people that was counting down the days till I was getting out. It was never going to be a career. It was always a means to an end. It was to lay the foundation for my future so that I could go to college and I could, create a life for myself that was successful. Right. And so when I got out, I thought I was going to be happy. Like, I was happy that day. I got a letter of appreciation from the captain. Like, they threw me a party. Everybody was coming by from all the different departments to say goodbye to me. Like, it was like a wonderful day. And I thought I was going to be so happy. I was just like, I'm out of here. I'm done. No, I had reserve time, but and the active part. And that was sad. And no one was more shocked than me that I had a difficult transition out. No one. So yeah, it's common, I think. And how did you change that around? Because I know earlier you said that you didn't go to organizations, which is so common, right? You don't utilize any veterans organizations. You don't go to groups with women veterans, because especially for you, you had a really horrible experience with women while
Yeah.
serving. So how did you begin to turn it around in your transition?
It was probably a few years, uh, say about 2 years after I left the reserves. That's when I started doing the blog and just kind of started taking stuff from like journals I had kept, deployment journals, stuff I had written, I guess diaries and all that, and just started putting them out there. And people were reading them, and they're just like, "I know your story," and I started realizing, okay, like I am not the only one struggling. I'm not the only one that's having a hard time. I'm not the only one that dealt with what I dealt with. And I just started realizing, like, okay, like this is more common than like probably uncommon. And so that really was the step towards learning to network and talk to veterans again. And then when I started podcasting, because of I got invited on to American Heritage podcast, and that
Ah,
changed
yes.
everything, talking to Seth, because
I love him.
I had never considered podcasting, because it's like I don't talk. like like and he had hit me up to come on his podcast as a guest, and I was like, I don't know how that works. Like, can you explain it to me? And then sure, I'll come on. And so he really introduced me to the podcast side of things. And then I just started kind of reading my blog and stuff like that, because I knew from my experience in the army that people didn't read a lot. And so it's just like, I'm just going to start reading it to them. And had kind of the same thing. People started reaching out, telling me their story. And then For Best LLC reached out. He's a retired Army Ranger. And he's like, you got to start bringing people on your show. Like, you got to start, I'll be your first guest. And so I was just like, okay. And then that started the whole section of the podcasting where I started talking to veterans and getting to know people outside of the service when you didn't have that worry of like how you're perceived or how you're gonna have to work together that day. Like it eliminated all that stuff. And then eventually I started having female veterans come on and I started realizing they had a similar experience. It's like, okay, we're not all that way. Or I started to realize the ones that were that way, why they did it. And so it helped me let go of a lot of the animosity and the guilt and just grudges. And that right there was like letting go of all that just kind of became a new foundation for me. And so then it was like, now that I can let go of all that and stop hating myself and the people that I feel like kind of opened this path up to me of going the wrong direction, now I can start trying to figure out who I want to be now that I don't have the uniform anymore. And so then I started looking at it instead of what I had lost in terms of like what can I make myself or what can I make from this? And that's when I started writing, or not even really writing the book, but kind of putting everything together to start a book because it was this idea of like, I'm going to turn my trauma into something. And so I'm going to make what my struggle was and all those issues I had, I'm going to make it worth something at the end of the day. And that's where I really just started to kind of grow past the past.
That's incredible. It's a really moving story because it's amazing. What I found the same way is hearing these stories and sharing these stories is healing for me and for the guests, right? And the more times you can share your story and for the person who's listening, because maybe they're not ready to share their story yet. Maybe they're not haven't even told one soul, but they can listen to your show, they can listen to my show, and they can know that they're not alone in whatever it is that they went through. And they can have that support without having to be vulnerable when they're not ready yet. And I think that's really powerful. The power of the connection and how we can help each
My
other.
biggest thing was when I
That's
finally
really
had
wonderful.
those guests start reaching out that weren't part of like an organization or a business, like trying to promote their stuff, just regular people that wanted to come on and tell their story. And I've had guests come on that said, I've never said this to anybody, but I heard what you said and I think I can do that. And it meant a lot to me to feel like people saw me as a safe space and didn't see me as somebody that was going to judge them and felt safe enough to come on and talk to me on Zoom or something like face to face. Like they have no idea who I am outside of the podcast. And so it
Mhm.
was a real comforting thing just for me to feel like I still felt like a battle buddy. It was like, I'm not like not a soldier anymore. Like there's still stuff there. And I started looking at the veteran side of things is like it's just kind of the extension of the military. It's a whole different thing. And now that I'm a military spouse, it's kind of like I try to talk to people more like explaining where things are coming from. So like the women around here that don't understand why their husbands come home the way that they do and they don't understand that connection, like trying to bridge that gap. And it's like, okay, there's my purpose again. Like it's the communication. I understand this. And it's not the purpose I thought I was looking for, which was a job or feeling like I was doing something in society, like making money or something like that. Like I had the wrong
Mhm.
idea of what purpose was because I had tied purpose to the wrong things in the army. It was the label and having a paycheck and a house and all this stuff. And so getting out, I realized like if I can be that like the bridge for that communication gap, that's something right there. And so it's like there's a duty again, there's a mission again. And so it's like there's all those things I was looking for.
That's amazing the way you put that because a lot of times, so we went into the military. That is service. We are service oriented. We are mission focused, yes, but we serve others. We serve, and that's in there. I mean, the person who goes into the military, there's a lot of reasons we go in, but some part of us wants to serve, right? We have that in us somewhere. And so we go and we do that. And when we come out, we might think, and I felt like that too, let me go get all of these degrees because I need to feel like I matter because this matters, right? Or let me go and do the like I need the house or the car or the fancy clothes or whatever that it is that's superficial. What I needed, and it sounds like what you found, was I needed to serve. I needed to feel like, and that's what I was doing. I didn't even realize what I was doing after I kind of came through my difficult transition, I started coming across veterans that were struggling. Back then it was MySpace and different platforms. But like as times evolved, I would run into somebody I went to high school with that had served and they were struggling, or someone random, or I'd meet someone just in the grocery store or at the VA, and or I'd come across an old person that I was serving with and we'd reconnect, and they were in some part of their struggle. And I would help them. Well, hey, do you know about this service? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? Are you trying this? You just need someone to talk to. Hey, have you taken your meds? And I did that for 20 years before I even started the podcast or had any idea that this is what I would be doing.
Yeah.
In fact, I didn't have an idea that I would be doing this. Someone said, you should be speaking about female veterans issues. I've never heard you talk about anything more passionate than veterans, especially female veterans. And I thought, oh, right. And it just kind of led me down this path. But since I did, the feeling of serving, it gives me that same purpose. So I completely identify with what you're saying. And I know that a lot of people, a lot of veterans feel better. And that's what I actually recommend to people is I will say, well, if you're struggling, seek out some veterans, maybe volunteer helping veterans and
Yeah.
see if that will help you feel a little bit more grounded and a little better. And it usually works, I would say. It usually works. And so I feel that it's beautiful. And I'm happy for you that
Thank you.
found and it helped you on your healing journey. So tell me, you were talking about your book. Let's talk about your book. Talk about that.
That book took, I mean, because it was really journal entries and diary stuff, like it was being written without me really knowing it for years. There's sections of it that are from my deployment journal that I kept when I was in Afghanistan. And so I had just this stack of paper, and it was when I started doing the blog, I was able to kind of start categorizing it and separating into pieces and kind of making some sense of it. And then once I had that, it was like, now I can kind of bring that together and organize it a little bit more and turn it into a book. And the biggest thing was I got to the point where the blog got a little bit difficult to keep up with. And so I let it go. And then I had people reach out that were like, I really liked reading your stuff. I would go back and read it. And so I thought, well, how can I do this for those people that got something from those words without me having to go back to trying to run a website that I don't have time for? So I figured I'm going to put everything into a book form so people can just carry it with them and just have it. And it's not going to go anywhere. If I go somewhere, like it's still there. Like if I, you know, decide to stop Cruise Corner or something like that, like you still have that book, you still have all the stuff that I put out there. And it was really just this idea of like, I just want to give my perspective. And it was pretty simple because a lot of people told me I couldn't be proud of my service just because I was a woman, because I got out right before combat arms opened up. So it's like, what did you actually do? Like, so you went to a combat zone. You probably shouldn't call yourself a combat veteran, though, just because you were there. And
Oh,
so it was this idea of like, well, let me tell you what we go through. And I kind of got to a point where I got hung up where I was like, maybe this isn't really worth doing. And I reached out to another author that wasn't a veteran, it was just a civilian author. And it's just like, do you have any advice? And she's just like, honey, if you're poor, you're not going to write a book. And so then it was like, oh, okay, so now I'm too broke to tell my story. And so like all these people are throwing stuff at me that was just kind of giving me ammunition. Like, yes, my service counts. Yes, I can still tell my story and not have a penny to my name. Like that, what's that? Like, and so it just became this kind of this step of like, I'm going to just do it. And it was also this idea of I'm going to explain what happened in my service because my family didn't know. They didn't know why I left. They didn't know about the MST. They didn't know about anything. And so unfortunately, that's how they had to find out, was reading the book. But it was finally that way of like, I'm going to get rid of this weight. I'm not carrying it anymore. And it was just like, I want to give the veteran perspective as I know it. I don't really want to say female perspective because I know I didn't necessarily have the same that a lot of women do. And so it was just literally my perspective and hoping that somebody could either understand where I was coming from or take something from it and maybe not be so horrible to other service members. get the word out about how MST is handled, not even on the legal end. Like a lot of people I realize understand that the army sucks with doing it, or just military wide, they suck with it, but they don't hear the story of like how women treat each other or how your other, like the emotional side to it. So I wanted to show people like, sure, going to war, like you're a badass and all, but look what some of us deal with. And there's a lot of trauma there. And I'm allowed to talk about PTSD. I'm allowed to be proud of what I survived. I'm allowed to say that I'm a combat veteran and this and that. And so it's just kind of like a big screw you. Like I have a story and I'm going to share it, read it or don't. Like,
I love that. And I'm glad that you shared it. I think it's amazing what you did. And I think that everybody should read Bottled Up. And so it's Confessions of a Struggling Veteran, right? Bottled Up, Confessions of a
bottled away, confessions of a struggle.
Bottled Away. Yeah. Thank you. And I think it's a amazing stories coming from you, and that people can really identify with that. And I'm glad you stood up. I'm glad that you said, I'm doing it. I'm writing this book. I don't care if you think, and I will venture to say this. Yes, you may not have had the experience of many female veterans, but you are a female veteran, and that is the female veteran's perspective as well, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's important because every single one of our stories, as different as they are, they matter. And that is why I started the Female Veterans Podcast, because it doesn't matter if you're an officer or enlisted or what branch you served in, whether you were a Coastie or National Guard or what you did. If you were in uniform, your story matters just by virtue of the fact that you're a female and you're in a male dominated field and you served. You matter. It's a big deal,
Yeah.
because if it wasn't, every woman would do it.
Yeah. For
Right.
sure.
And what you did, and you know what you did, having to deal with MST and having to deal with nonstop harassment, hazing, and bullying, and then continue to serve and continue to, you didn't break, and it's
And
okay if you would
that's
have.
what I wanted. That's what I
you
wanted
know
people to understand when they were trying to like create this whole image of like, women are weak in the military or they make it worse. And it was just like, well, look at the people that are actually destroying it. Look what they're doing. And we're not weak. Cause it's like, and I remember telling a male soldier that was just like, what do you guys actually do that's tough? And I said, have you ever stood next to someone in a formation that raped you? Have you ever had to do that? And I was just like, do you know how many of us had to? I was like, tell me how easy you think that would have been. Oh, you went and, went and played with your gun today and got to go down to the range and do some mock firefights. That's nice. Like, but don't tell me that we're weak, because you have no idea what we
Yeah.
put up with.
And the guy that raped you is your boss too. How many times does that happen?
Yeah.
Right? Right. Giving you your orders and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Just, it sickens me that the way people think sometimes, and that they think that it's so easy, but it's not. There's a lot of
Not
things,
at
there's a
all.
lot of layers, and there's a lot of variables, and there's a lot of moving pieces that people don't understand. But what you do and what I do help to break down that culture of silence. And so that people can get a glimpse of what it is that we do experience. It's not all bad, but it certainly isn't all good. And every single story is important.
That's what my mom told me after she read it. She's like, I understand now the confusion you guys feel, because it's such a contradictory thing of how she's like, even page to page, like one page is how much you loved it, and the next page is all these horrible things. And she's like, I can understand now where you're just so lost afterwards, because there's just so many emotions and there's so much stuff attached to it. And the good gets entangled with the bad.
Mm.
And to let go of the bad memories, sometimes you lose the good ones too. So you hold on to the good ones, so you hold on to the bad ones. And it just creates this whole just ball of, I don't even know what, stress and everything else.
It's like
So
a swirling tornado
yeah,
right
and it's just
inside you.
and that's why I wrote it the way that I did, because it wasn't just for other women to know. It wasn't to break it down for men in the military, but it was for civilians to understand us too, because I really wanted to bring everybody together so that the big conversation could take place. It wasn't just military or just women. I really wanted to have everybody included in that conversation.
That's beautiful. Absolutely. So I know that I've taken up a lot of your time and I
It's
really
fine.
appreciate it. I do. And I just have a couple of more questions for you. So
Okay.
after everything that you experienced in the military and your transition out, what advice would you have for our veteran sisters, or if there's any veteran brothers listening that are coming behind you?
I think for veteran sisters, I just hope we can learn to treat each other better because I know some of that treatment carries over into the veteran side and to just stop being each other's enemy and just start, just like you said earlier, like fixing each other's crown instead of like ripping it off each other's head. Like there's enough space for us to all be here. Like there doesn't, and I think that goes for every, like the veteran community. It's very competitive. And my whole thing has been just sort of like, why can't we all do a piece? Like, why can't we all sit at the table? Why are we telling each other who's good enough to talk about struggle, who's good enough to tell their story, who's good enough to like be able to appreciate their service when there's room for all of us and we could all learn something from each other. So if we could just let that go and start listening, we could really make this, like especially the movement with like the 22 a day. I feel like that's where we could really make some bigger strides if we stop tearing each other down and stop impeding each other from opening up and getting it out and speaking about it because it does help. It does help us heal. So just be good.
That's amazing advice and very much needed. I think a lot of us leave the military feeling like we've got a knife in our back from the government, right? Like we have a big knife in our back. And so as veteran sisters, I feel like it's our job to help take that knife out and just give a hug and just say, I got you. I'm here to support you, especially those of us that have been out for a long time. Oh my gosh, I think I've been out of the military almost 25 years. So, yeah, that's just like it just hit home, right? So, the point is, all of you guys coming behind me, and then of course there are so many that came before me that we owe it to each other to support each other and to be there for each other and to offer that support and that shoulder and that ear and to fix each other's crowns, you know. And that way we can create the change we want to see. We can reduce the suicide rate amongst veterans. We can reduce the homelessness rate amongst veterans, especially female veterans is crazy. So how many female veterans are homeless? We can change the perspective that veterans are men and that is still
Yeah.
prevailing to this day. It's in 2021 because we don't quite make up one quarter of the military yet, but where there are more female veterans every day and we're out here. So we have to keep doing what we're doing. We have to keep going with Kruse Corner and the Female Veterans Podcast and doing our projects to help let the world know that we're here. And then also to keep making that change for our sisters that are serving, our little sisters that are in right now who are still dealing with MST and
Yeah.
bullying and harassment even today. So I appreciate you so much and your wise words and your amazing advice. And will you tell everybody where we can find you if we want to follow along your journey?
So you can find Cruise Corner, which is KRUSE_corner. You can find me on Instagram or Facebook. The podcast is looks like it's pretty big on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, but it's also Spotify, Anchor. Some of my guest episodes I've done with other podcasts, you can find them on YouTube. And then the book, just look for Bottled Away Confessions of a Struggling Veteran on Amazon and it should pop up.
That's amazing stuff. And everybody, if you've been listening to the Female Veterans Podcast, that I will put all of the links in the show description box so that you can find Lani and follow along with her journey and support her show and her book and just, hopefully be impacted by everything she's doing. So I want to say thank you so much for being my guest today, for taking time to share your
Thank you for
story.
having me on. Really appreciate it.
Oh, honey, the pleasure is all mine. And I hope that you will keep in touch with me and that we can do more stuff together in the future.
I'd love to.
Awesome. Well, with that, we're going to wrap it up. I want to say thank you, everyone, for coming on this journey with me. I really appreciate you guys. I want to say thank you for the support and the love that I have been getting for this show. All the donations, they are unnecessary, but they are appreciated. And if you want to support the organization that I am on the board of, Hope for Veterans, we have lots of really great events for women living in Florida, but of course, you can donate if you live anywhere in the country. I just happened to live in Florida for many years. I was aware of the homelessness and the issues that women suffer in that region. And so I joined forces with them to help try to change that. And so if you want to support that cause, all the information is in the description box, as always. And thank you for listening. I love you guys, and I will talk to you next time.